Life had been going smoothly. I guess it was too smooth and I should have expected something, but Kelly and I had had a very good marriage. 22 years, in fact. We had the usual bumps in the road, but nothing major, and life had turned out pretty good, at least as far as I was concerned. But here's my story. Kelly and I had gone together since we met in our first week of high school, and I fell head over heels in love with her. Her reddish blonde hair, her general build, her sparkling green eyes, and that killer smile she gave me indicated that she liked what she saw when she caught me looking at her most of my lunch period. I was just picking up my lunch tray to return it when she walked by with her friend, and Kelly said, "I hope you know it's not polite to stare." I coughed and was trying to think up a good answer, but before I could get any words out of my now parched throat, this angel said, "Next time, just come on over and sit down and talk with us, okay? We won't bite hard." Then they both walked to their next class giggling and looking back at me. The next day, I took her up on her offer and sat across from them, and we made our introductions. Kelly Thompson and her friend Angela Melanowski. Angela was a large girl, but still very beautiful. She wasn't fat. While Kelly was 5 feet 1 inch and said she weighed 101 pounds, Angela was almost 6 and wouldn't tell us her weight. She was on the girls' wrestling and weightlifting teams. She was one hell of a lot stronger than I was, and I worked out quite a bit. By the way, I'm Michael Grant, 5 feet 8 inches when I met Kelly. I wormed my way into Kelly's heart by being her friend first, and by helping her parents around their house. If I went over for dinner, I'd make sure that Kelly and I would clean the table after dinner, and we would do the dishes, which made Mrs. Thompson pretty happy. Mr. Thompson would say, "You see now, Sarah, I told you we didn't need to waste money and buy a dishwasher. Kelly got us one." He'd laugh at his joke and get another beer out of the refrigerator and plunk himself down in his recliner in front of the TV. I was also pretty handy working on cars and fixed Mr. Thompson's car, saving him from having to go to a mechanic. During high school, when I wasn't studying, I was buying non-running cars and fixing and cleaning them up to sell. Some were pretty easy fixes, but others needed the engine and transmission rebuilt. My Uncle Tim helped me a lot while he was staying with us. At the time, I didn't quite understand why he was there so much, but it turned out he was often kicked out by his current girlfriend or wife for playing around with another woman. He did teach me a lot about cars, though. I worked hard in school, and so did Kelly. We both had goals. I wanted to be an engineer, and Kelly wanted to be a surgical nurse. That meant we needed good grades and scholarships to afford college. We would study late at night quite often, her mom coming down to check on us from time to time. She never caught us doing anything because we really weren't. Kelly had only once let me get to first base before shutting down and saying that she was afraid of getting pregnant and messing up her chances of becoming a nurse. We did have some very heavy makeout sessions and an hour or so of dry humping with her, and I'd say I needed to use the bathroom, and only 1 or 2 strokes and I'd be blasting off into the toilet. I had made quite a lot of money fixing up the cars that I had originally planned on using for college, but at our graduation, I knelt down before Kelly and asked her to marry me, presenting her with a 4-carat diamond ring encircled by 6 rubies and several diamond chips. After much crying, she said yes. Then her mother came over and asked, "Okay, Michael, just when are you planning on having this wedding?" I kissed Kelly's hand, the one with the ring, and said, "Right after our next graduation ceremony." By this time, I had grown to 6 feet 2 inches, and Kelly was now 5 feet 7 inches with these perfect 36 C's that defied gravity. They not only passed the pencil test. In order for a stamp to stay there, you would have to lick it. Guess how I knew? Kelly and I had a good summer, though I knew we wouldn't be seeing too much of each other once college started. Kelly's nursing college was 45 miles away, but she was still going to live at home. Her mother insisted on it. I had started at the local state college using a grant I obtained due to my grades. I had joined the Air Force ROTC at Mr. Thompson's suggestion, figuring it would look good on my resume. My first year at college went great, and I worked hard to learn each subject. When the grades were posted, I ended up with a 3.96 average. At my next ROTC meeting in early August, the lieutenant handed me an envelope and asked, "I hope you will take them up on their offer." I opened the envelope, and inside were all the explanations I needed. It was an invitation to come up and visit the campus up at the U.S. Air Force Academy in Colorado Springs, Colorado. I asked Kelly if she wanted to go with me, but she had taken on extra classes, and she said she couldn't afford to miss them. I drove up and was given the royal treatment while I was there. They had assigned a senior cadet, Walker J. To me to show me around and anywhere I asked to go, he showed me, plus taking me to all the historic spots around campus. Lunch was outside with barbecued hamburgers, hot dogs, and even veggie burgers for the few that wanted them. I was surprised at the fun activities they provided for the regular students too. When the speaker sounded 1800 hours, Walker guided me to the mess hall, and instead of us sitting at the rows of tables where the cadets were sitting, Walker guided me up to the head table where the commandant and his subordinates were sitting. There was a placard with my name on it next to Major General Harold P. James. He stood and welcomed me and told me to sit. As I did, I asked, "Sir, does every prospect get to sit with you at the head table?" His smile filled his face and he said, "Son, you sure speak your mind, don't you? Art said you'd be a good fit here, and I'm taking a liking to you already. He called me this morning and said he's known you for years, and that if the Air Force didn't take you under our wing, we'd be the biggest asses since President. Well, never mind." I looked at him because I didn't know any Art. "Sir, excuse me, sir. Who is this Art person you were talking about?" The general chuckled and nudged one of the men on his other side before asking me, "You mean you don't know your girlfriend's father's first name?" I swallowed hard and managed to get out, "Mr. Thompson?" The general slapped me on the back and said, "That's him's son, old Art Thompson, one of the craziest airmen I've ever known. If we wanted a party, that man would disappear from base and come back with a case of booze for us, no questions asked. If we needed parts for our planes, Art could come up with them. Don't ask me how, but he would find out what someone had and what they needed and trade for them. I swear that man could trade a girl out of her virginity for one of my airmen before she knew it." The whole front table broke into laughter at that statement. After dinner, the general asked me to follow him to his office. We were accompanied by Walker J. and two of the general's aides. He sat behind his huge oak desk and pointed at the chair in front of his desk and had me sit in it, telling the others to sit at the overstuffed leather couch along the wall. He pushed a small stack of papers in front of me and said, "Michael Grant, we here at the United States Air Force Academy would be proud to have you as one of our cadets. With the recommendations we have and your grades, I have procured a full-ride scholarship for you contingent on your continuing good grades. Son, with what I have seen so far, maintaining that should be a breeze. What do you say? Would you like to become an Air Force cadet?" I was gobsmacked. I swallowed hard and finding my voice, I said, "General, I do believe that your offer is the best thing that ever happened to me. But sir, I would like to talk it over with my parents and my girlfriend, Kelly, and her parents. May I give you my answer in 48 hours, sir?" General James smiled and said, "Mr. Grant, actually you may take up to a week, but no longer, understand?" I stood and shook his hand and thanked him and was escorted by Walker J. to the barracks we shared for the night before driving home the next morning. As I stepped out of my car, Kelly ran up to me throwing her arms around my neck, kissing me deeply with tears in her eyes, and said, "Michael, I'm going to miss you so much. Promise me that you won't get involved with any of those cute female cadets while you're away." It seems that Kelly already knew all about the general's offer, and I found out the general convinced her that it was really in her best interest if I accepted it. I looked at her and said somewhat surprised, "I guess I don't have to tell you about their offer, do I?" She smiled and said, "No, Uncle Hal called last night and told us all about it." I moved to hold her at arm's length and said, "Uncle Hal? Major General Harold P. James is your uncle?" Kelly smiled and said, "Yes, he's Mother's oldest brother, stepbrother actually. His mother died giving birth to him, and Grandma James is the only mother he has ever known. My mother, Sarah, being the baby of the family, became Hal's favorite. Besides, Grandma James was sick after her birth, and he felt it was his duty to take care of Mom. They've always been very close. Uncle Hal is the one that introduced my father to my mother. He felt that he was an honorable man and would make her a good husband for her and father for her children, and he was right." Again, I had trouble believing that Kelly's family, and now she was planning my future, but I figured I may as well roll with the punches. Being an Air Force officer wasn't that bad a gig, and I'd still end up being an engineer. The only trouble was I was going to be limited in my visitations to see Kelly. That would be the real challenge. When I talked to my parents, my father, Tom, was as proud as could be, but my mother, Linda, was worried that I might be sent into action. I assured her that I wasn't interested in flying, that I just wanted to get my engineering degree, get out, and work on computer-driven automation or power transfer stations. I called General James the next day and told him I was accepting his gracious offer. He said he was going to be watching me at Art and Kelly's request. Then he laughed. I didn't know whether he was joking or not, but I had to assume he wasn't. Soon, at the academy, the classes were going along fine, as did the physical and mental training to whip us into officers. We were expected to become leaders when we graduated, and they held us to a very high standard. I was quite surprised when I was invited to a party with a bunch of cadets at one of their friends' apartment complexes one Saturday. When I got there, I'd say over half of them were running around half-dressed or naked, including the female cadets I recognized, and they had taken over the pool. The party encompassed several of the apartments. This cute little blonde came up to me wearing only a green lace thong, holding a drink of some kind, and rubbed her crotch up against mine and said, "You're cute. Why don't we get those clothes off and let's find us a bedroom where I can screw your brains out?" I will have to admit, my tool wanted to as she was grabbing it through my pants, but then I saw another girl who reminded me so much of Kelly that guilt shot through my brain like I had been hit by lightning. I eased her away and said, "I'm sorry, but I think this is the wrong type of party for me," and turned to leave. She hollered, "What's the matter? Are you queer or something?" A number of my fellow classmates had heard her, and back at campus, I began hearing them call me queer boy or QB behind my back. A few weeks later, 2 of the seniors called me that repeatedly, even after I asked them to stop. When I walked up to them, they just laughed at me, so I decked both of them, which landed me squarely in the general's office. General James sat behind his desk as I stood at attention while he was reading the charges in his hands. He shook his head and said, Michael, hitting a superior technically is a court-martial offense. You do know that, don't you?" "Sir, yes, sir," I responded. Looking me over hard, he said, "It says here that you hit them for no reason. Is that right, son?" "Sir, no, sir," I answered. "Care to tell me about it in your own words? And you don't have to call me sir and be formal in here. This is my office and our conversation is just between us. Got it?" "Sir, yes." But he stopped me before I could get out the last "sir." "Just between us. Now tell me what's going on," he said. I didn't want to rat out my fellow cadets, but I didn't want to be court-martialed either. After shuffling my feet for a bit, I said, "Well, sir, I was invited to an off-campus party a while back with a bunch of other cadets. When I got there, at least half of them were naked or only partially dressed. That included most of the female cadets too, sir. People were screwing in the pool and going in and out of several apartments. I assumed to use the bedrooms. As I stood there, this cute blonde came up to me wearing only a green lace thong and began rubbing her crotch to mine and said, "You're cute. Why don't we get those clothes off of you, and let's find us a bedroom where I can screw your brains out." She then grabbed my privates and tried to pull me into one of the apartments when I saw a girl that looked a lot like Kelly, and I realized what I was doing and pushed this blonde away and told her I was at the wrong type of party. She said rather loudly, "What's the matter? Are you queer or something?" Well, sir, several of my classmates heard her, and it got back to school and people began calling me queer boy, or QB behind my back, and sometimes not so quietly. Those 2 guys were taunting me over and over, and I finally had all I could take. I know it was wrong, but something inside me exploded. A couple of quick jabs to their jaws, and they went down like a candle flame in a hurricane. I can't say that I'm sorry, sir, because I'm not. I guess I deserve the court-martial. The general looked at me smiling and said, "Don't worry, Michael. I'll handle this one. You did a bad thing, but for the right reason. You can go now and send in those 2 yahoos you hit on your way out, would you?" I saluted him and said, "Sir, yes, sir. And thank you, sir," then turned and headed out the door and told the general's aide he wanted to see the 2 upperclassmen that I had hit. They were sitting on the bench with smug looks on their face, thinking I was going to be court-martialed or expelled. 2 days later, there was a general assembly about sexual harassment and the proper way to report it, or even the appearance of harassment or innuendo which could cause mental issues with someone. It also covered assault and some on- and off-campus parties, which were now going to be subject to campus security checks if they were located. Also, for the next 2 weeks, the 2 upperclassmen that harassed me were in blue jumpsuits picking up garbage all over campus and cleaning the latrines instead of in their uniforms. I think everyone got the message that those 2 were the ones that the harassment lecture was intended for. Suddenly, they became shunned from all the parties. Then Christmas vacation hit, 3 weeks at home. I was overjoyed as Kelly's master's program had the same break. She had told me she had lots of things planned for us. We were going cross-country skiing, camping, driving up the coast, and spending 3 nights at a beautiful bed and breakfast overlooking the ocean. I thought to myself, I hope she ordered separate beds as I didn't know if I could control myself. Kelly's parents had gone to Phoenix to see Kelly's sister and their new grandson, so she was alone at home. Over the phone, she offered to let me stay there, but I said, I wasn't sure if the two of us could be trusted not to do something. She said she could if I could. I told her that was the problem as I wasn't sure I could. She giggled and kissed me over the phone. I was thinking about this while driving all the way home. I swear I was hard the entire trip. I figured I'd make a quick stop to see her before going to my parents'. As soon as I pulled into her driveway, she ran to me wearing an almost see-through white sundress with pink and yellow daisies on it, throwing her arms around my neck and her legs around my waist. We kissed for what must have been 10 minutes or more when Mrs. Wilson from next door yelled, "Get a room, you two." Kelly separated herself from me, and I grabbed her hand, and we headed inside where she had dinner waiting for me. Her mother's meatloaf with mushroom brown gravy, mashed potatoes, green beans with bacon, and cheesy biscuits. Dinner was perfect. I had eaten just enough to be full but not stuffed. Kelly and I sat on her big couch in front of the TV as she turned it on in the VCR. She had put on A Miracle on 34th Street and snuggled up next to me. She said she was getting cold and wanted to change. She ran upstairs and came down with a blanket wrapped around her. As she got in front of me, she opened the blanket to show me she was wearing this sheer white baby doll pajama top with the tiniest matching white lace thong. She climbed into my lap, straddling my legs, and began French kissing me deeply. I was instantly hard and turned on like there was no tomorrow. I broke our kiss and started to ask, "Kelly, are you sure about?" When she cut me off and began to unzip my jeans. She unfastened my belt, then tugged at them down my legs and managed to get my pants and shoes off at the same time. She gave me B-job. Oh God, I thought. Where did she learn this? Part of me wanted to know, but I knew if I asked her, she'd be pissed at me for asking because I would be implying she was unfaithful to me, but damn, she was doing it like a pro. Not that I've ever been with one before. Kelly was screaming like a banshee as orgasms hit her like a tsunami. She was yelling, "Yes." "Oh God, Michael," I said. "Kelly, I'm about to explode. Let me pull out. We're not ready to be parents. We both have school to finish." But Kelly kept up her frantic assault, planting her lips tightly to mine and tangling her tongue with mine, and I exploded. Oh my Lord. We're still on her couch, holding each other in that same position as Kelly's legs and body quivered, and I caressed her dew-laden back and pulled her sweet jugs into my chest. What had we done? This was so unlike the Kelly I had left a few months ago. Now I was really wondering if she was seeing someone else. I know it was stupid, but she had gone from a shy little flower into a lust-filled vixen. Still, I loved her and was softly kissing the sweat from her neck and shoulder when she turned and looked at me. Her eyes were glazed over, and she was smiling like the cat that ate the canary. Placing her finger in my mouth, she asked, "Did you like my present, my love?" That was one hell of a present. What in the world did I do to deserve that? Aren't you worried that you will get pregnant? You know that would throw a monkey wrench into our schooling plans. I said. Kelly leaned back with me, holding her with my arms to keep her from falling, and said, "Michael, dearest, first off, last month I talked with one of the doctors and he prescribed birth control pills for me. Second is the reason for that was that Uncle Hal called and told me how you turned down an almost naked blonde that was trying to pull you by your manhood into a bedroom to have wild sex with you. And you told her no, you wouldn't do it. You were thinking of me and knew that I wouldn't condone you cheating on me if I ever found out. I decided to give you a very special welcome home gift and talked with several other nurses, and they gave me ideas on how to pleasure you. So tell me, did I do a good job? It looked like you were enjoying it." "Hell, Michael, I know I sure did. When I described your size to them, several of them said that if we didn't get married, they wanted your phone number. I didn't know whether to be proud of you or pissed at them. I pulled her to me and gave her a very deep kiss. I was loving bring her off like this. Having come twice, we had just made out for a while until sleep overtook us for a few hours. The noise of traffic and somebody's lawnmower woke us up. This was Southern California, you know. She got up first and came back with an electric toothbrush in her mouth with one hand working it and a regular toothbrush for me. After getting rid of the grunge, we rinsed and somehow ended up having sex. Where we found the peppermint toothpaste gave an extra zing to our play. Kelly told me to be sure to remember that for our wedding night. After we gave each other mutual orgasms, I lay on my back as she got out of bed and said, "I'm going to get breakfast started. You just lay there and relax and build up your strength." Then with a big grin, she said, "You're going to need it, mister," then ran out of the bedroom. I lay there for a few minutes, then smelled that delicious odor of bacon cooking. I threw on my pants and ran to the car to get my ditty bag, then shaved, washed up, and used deodorant. I threw on a t-shirt, liquor running shorts, and my running shoes. As I stepped into the kitchen, I had to stop and take in the most beautiful sight I had ever seen. Kelly was standing at the stove, wearing her mother's apron with nothing else on. It just covered from her jugs to just above her knees. Sarah's pretty short, by the way, but what a sweetheart. I walked over to the coffee maker and poured myself a cup of coffee. Kelly heard me and said, "You know where the sugar and cream are, so help yourself. Don't use them anymore," I said as I lightly slapped her cute bum, then rubbed it tenderly. "I'm making corn cakes and maple bacon for breakfast. Is that okay with you?" I sat down at the table where she had already sat the morning's paper and was having trouble reading it with Kelly bobbing around in front of me. I was finding the licorice stretching in my crotch as I watched her. I got up and poured myself another cup and had sat back down when Kelly opened the oven and brought out a plate piled high with crisp bacon and another with a huge stack of corn cakes that she knows I love. Sarah, her mother, makes them for me as she knows I love them. They're regular pancakes with creamed corn in the batter. Kelly only ate one and one piece of bacon. When I asked her why, she said, "Because I don't want all that food lugging me down when I race you through the park and back to see who gets to decide what we're going to do tonight." Shit, I'd already eaten 6 corn cakes and at least 10 pieces of bacon. I helped Kelly clean up the kitchen and tidied up the place before we headed out. We had decided to take an easy jog to Starbucks first, and after a morning caffeine fix, we would race around the park and back to her house. Besides, I needed to keep in shape for my classes. Instead of going back to her house, Kelly wanted to stop and see my parents. Dad wasn't home, but Mom was in the living room folding clothes. She smiled when she saw us walk in, then admonished me for not coming home last night. "Michael, what are the neighbors going to think about you spending the night at Kelly's house with her parents not home? You are going to ruin her reputation. You know that, don't you?" she said. Before I could answer, Kelly said, "Don't worry, Linda. Michael stayed downstairs last night. He was the perfect gentleman, smiling like a Cheshire cat. God, I hoped my mother didn't notice the way she accentuated perfect." Mom looked at her sternly, then said, "Oh, so it's Linda you're calling me now instead of Mrs. Grant, is it?" Kelly took half a step back and, trying to formulate a good answer, said, "Well, Mrs. Grant, I thought we should be on a first-name basis since soon I will also be Mrs. Grant." Though she said it quite apologetically. Mom got off the couch and Kelly stepped back. Then Mom smiled and threw her arms around Kelly, giving her a big hug, and said, "Can't I tease my son's beautiful future bride? But really, I think it would be better if you spent the night here until your parents get home tomorrow. I know how much temptation being home alone can cause, and right now, you two don't need any problems. Kelly, you still have 2.5 years in your master's program finishes, and Michael has 1.5 years before he graduates, then 4 years until he fulfills his tour of duty unless he re-enlists. How about if we plan your wedding for the week he graduates from the academy?" Kelly's eyes got really big and the smile on her face said it all. She jumped into my mother's arms and hugged her so hard Mom had to stop her to get her breath. Kelly turned to me and said, "Michael, what do you think of that idea? I think it would be wonderful. You said when Mom asked you when we would get married, and you said at the next graduation. That is unless you would rather hold it at my graduation?" Kelly came to me, putting her arms around my neck and pulling me down so we could kiss. I was now 6 feet 5 inches to her 5 feet 8 inches, and we were so much in love it didn't matter. On the day of Kelly's parents' return, Kelly and I had gone for a run. We decided to hit a wilderness trail up through Silverado Canyon for something different to challenge us. We had made a hard run up this long uphill trail to a beautiful viewpoint and stopped for a drink of water. Kelly looked around and said, "Michael, do you see anybody?" I looked in all directions and shook my head no. Kelly whipped off her top, pulled down her running shorts, and yanked my top over my head, throwing it down on a flat rock and laid down on it, spreading her legs and said, "Michael, are you going to just stand there, or are you going to take me up on my invitation?" She didn't have to ask me twice. It wasn't the most comfortable place to make love, but it did make it difficult for me to orgasm, which gave Kelly multiple orgasms. After about 30 minutes, she asked, "Michael, are you going to explode?" Kelly, honestly, babe, this isn't the most comfortable position to be in to try to orgasm. I found myself letting out a loud, primal scream that echoed through the canyons below. Someone below yelled back, "Sounds like someone's having fun." Kelly got embarrassed and she quickly dressed. My top was caked with mud, so I had to carry it, and we made our way back to my car and headed towards home, both with big smiles on our faces. I had managed to stop and find a faucet to wash my top off. When we got to my house, my mom said that Kelly's parents had called and asked if we could come to their house as my mom had talked with Sarah about the possible marriage when I graduated. Kelly and I decided to run just for the fun of it, and we entered the house, giggling about our mountaintop fun. I sat down at the kitchen table while Kelly grabbed 2 bottles of water, then sat next to me. Sarah walked in and froze. She then sat down opposite us and was tapping her fingers on the table, then said, "Okay, you two. How long?" "How long what, Mom?" Kelly asked. "How long have you two been screwing Kelly James Thompson?" she said, very pissed. "What do you mean, Mom? What makes you think that Michael and I have been having sex?" Her mother looked at the two of us and said, "Because the two of you have the same look that your father and I had when we were having sex just before we got married. I'm not that old that I don't remember the feeling. I was just lucky that he was using condoms. Harold told him that if he got me pregnant before he married me, that he would end up being one of the dummies on the live fire exercises on the firing range. But you two sure look like you're having sex. Now are you?" "Mom, that's really none of your business. I'm an adult and you shouldn't treat me like a child." Kelly threw back at her mother. Sarah sighed and said, "Kelly, my darling, I should have had this talk with you long before this, but I figured there would be time. I guess I only have myself to blame. Are you two using condoms?" Kelly finally shook her head no, looking down at the table, not at her mother as she held my hand tightly. Sarah asked, "So I guess you were on birth control pills?" Kelly nodded yes. Her mother rolled her eyes and her head leaned back. Then she leaned forward and leaned over to Kelly, and taking her hand she said, "My sweet darling, us James women, well, most of us have problems with birth control pills working for us. I was on birth control pills when your sister was conceived as well as you. Your poor father had to use condoms if he wanted sex, or I had to try to give him B-jobs, which I never was very good at. I don't know how long you two have been intimate, but from now on, you need to use condoms, understood?" Sarah was looking directly at me when she said that. "Also, you had better get a couple of pregnancy tests and take one now, another in about a week, then one more in another week. Michael probably has strong swimmers, and they may last a while." We sat there in shock, holding each other's hands tightly. For the first time since I had known Kelly, she looked scared. Tears were starting to run down her cheeks. I pulled her tight and held her, then whispered in her ear, "Sweetheart, we will find a way to get through this. Maybe you're not pregnant." Apparently, that wasn't the right thing to say as she began sobbing hysterically, pressing her head tightly to my chest. Sarah got up and walked around behind us and held us in her arms, kissing Kelly but shaking her head. Again she said, "Kids, I'm really sorry I didn't say something sooner. I just thought there would be more time, I guess." Sarah took Kelly up to her bedroom and I ran home, changed into some jeans and a polo shirt, and headed to the pharmacy and picked up several pregnancy tests and a box of condoms. Boy, did I get a funny look from the girl at the check stand. I think we went to school together, and here I was picking up this combination of items. I quickly drove over to Kelly's and handed the bag to her mom and asked where Kelly was. "She's up in her room sleeping. When she wakes up, I'll make sure she takes one. We will let you know what the results are." The next morning, Kelly called. She sounded like she had been crying and said, "Michael, it looks like you're going to be a father. My parents want you to bring your parents over. We all need to talk." Hell, what was I going to tell my parents? Shit. I said to myself, banging my head against my bedroom wall. Mom, hearing the banging noise, opened my door to see me squeezing the phone in one hand and my head against the wall and asked, Michael, what's wrong? Please tell me. I stood and looked at the ceiling, and she walked over to me and raised her arms and placed her hands up on my shoulders, then pulled my head down so she could look at me face to face. Michael Grant, I'm your mother. I gave birth to you. I love you. You can tell me anything, and I will always be here for you. Do you understand that? I felt so bad that I was going to disappoint them, and a few tears were leaking down my cheeks, so Mom wiped them away and just looked up at me, waiting for me to say something. Mustering up the strength, I took a deep breath and said, Mom, I guess you are going to be called Grandma soon. Her jaw dropped open, and she looked at me for a minute, then said, Kelly, I hope? I nodded. She was shaking her head, then said, I warned you too, didn't I? You two were playing with fire, but now we're going to have to make the best of it. How far along is she? She can't be far along. The first time we had sex was the night I got home, which was only 10 days ago. I hadn't planned on anything happening as we were planning on saving ourselves for our honeymoon, but Kelly had found out that a female cadet had tried to seduce me, and I turned her down, so she decided to reward me and went on the pill and got some advice from her coworkers on how to treat their men, and I had only planned on stopping by her house to let her know I was back, then coming back here to you guys. She had made me dinner, then put on a movie while we sat on the couch and watched it, and things just sort of happened. 10 days, Mom shouted. Michael, are you sure it's yours? How do you know she wasn't fooling around with someone else before you got home? Now I was getting upset with my mother and went on the defensive. Mom, Kelly's not that type of girl. That night, we took each other's virginity. I could tell it was her first time, and I know damn well it is mine. How could you even think such a thing? Standing there with her hands on her hips, she said, Because Michael, you said she was on the pill, and yet, somehow she became pregnant. That doesn't add up, does it? Mom, yesterday when we came back from our run, we had sex during our run. Then when we went over to Kelly's house and her mother saw us when we came in and knew from the way we looked that we had been having sex. She then asked Kelly if we had been using condoms, and Kelly told her she was on the pill. Her mom kind of went off. Then once she calmed down, explained that she had failed to tell Kelly that birth control pills don't usually work for the women in her family, hormones or something. Look, Mom, her parents want all of us to come over now, so we can talk about this situation. Where is Dad? I need to go break the news to him, unless you would rather do it for me? Please, I said. Mom gave me her fed up with me look and said, Oh no, mister. That's one talk that you're going to have to tell your father all on your own. He's out in the garage working on the mower. You go tell him the news and tell him I said he needs to come in, shower, and put on clean clothes so we can go over to the Thompsons for this lovely talk. Oh, Michael, this is going to be hard on your father. Please be gentle with him. She turned, pulling me out of my room, and sort of pushed me in the direction of the garage before heading towards their room. This was one talk with my father I wasn't looking forward to. I got to the garage door, and I heard my father gritching at the mower because he couldn't get it back together properly. I stepped in and watched him for a bit until he realized someone was watching him, then looked up at me, then said, What's the matter, Mikey boy? You look like you lost your best friend. You and Kelly have an argument? With my lips quivering, it took all my strength to say the words that I thought would kill my father. Dad, Kelly's pregnant. His eyes lit up. He jumped up, hugging me and twirling me around, chanting, I'm going to be a grandpa. I'm going to be a grandpa. He stopped, then said, Oh, son, it's going to be difficult for you two for a while, but I'm sure you two can make it. I've seen the love you two have for each other, and she's such a wonderful girl. I can't wait to have a little one that I can take fishing, to teach baseball to, or if it's a little girl, have tea parties, or take her shopping for dresses and dollhouses. Have you told your mother yet? I nodded. Was she as excited as I am? Not really, Dad. I said, She doesn't think the baby is mine, but I know Kelly isn't that type of girl. By the way, we need to go over to the Thompsons and talk about this situation, and Mom said to get in there and clean up and put on clean clothes so we can go over there. He was off like a shot. In the Thompsons' front room, the 6 of us sat. Mom and Dad on the love seat, Art and Sarah on their couch, and Kelly and I sitting next to each other on chairs near both of them. Art stood as he started the conversation. Let's not beat around the bush here. These two need to get married. I'm not having a grandchild born out of wedlock. Don't you two agree? He said, pointing to my parents. They both told them they agreed with him. Good, and I hope you two are willing to go along with this, he he said, looking at us. We held hands and both nodded. Good. I've called in some favors and we're going down to City Hall today and get you to your marriage license, and Friday evening Judge Bartholomew will be here to marry you too. You need to get your best man and maid of honor lined up, and if you'd like, a few of your friends, but I'd rather keep it on the down low. Any questions? My father spoke up. Friday is New Year's Eve. Won't that be rushing things a bit? Art smiled and said, well, Kelly has to go back to school on Monday, and she said that Michael leaves for Colorado on Tuesday, so that's not really rushing it now, is it? Besides, with that date for an anniversary, they will hardly ever forget if, will they? Judge Bartholomew has pulled some strings and gotten their marriage license backdated to a week before last so that they can get married on Friday. He understands the situation and is glad to help out. He really is a good friend. My mother spoke up saying, but Kelly is only what, 10 or 11 days pregnant, isn't she? Are you really sure she's pregnant? Shouldn't we wait and see and check with a doctor before rushing onto this marriage head first? What if the baby? I was shaking my head no at her before she said what I knew she was going to say. She wanted a paternity test, but I knew Kelly and trusted her implicitly. Sarah looked at my mom and said, what did you mean, what if the baby? Mom just shook her head and told her never mind. We went with our parents and picked up our marriage license in Judge Bartholomew's chambers, and on Friday, we were married in Art and Sarah's living room. We didn't have any friends other than my best friend Paul, who was my best man, and Kelly's sister, who flew in to be her matron of honor. General James was also there, and it was hard to read him. I wasn't sure if he was pleased with me or pissed off at me. He really didn't talk to me much, but he did talk a lot to Kelly and her parents. We were treated to a weekend stay at the Marriott honeymoon suite by our parents, but saying goodbye to Kelly on Sunday evening was so very difficult that I cried after she left. Back at the academy, I poured myself into my studies. It helped me not think about Kelly and our baby. Kelly was busy working on her master's program and theses, so she seldom emailed me. Every once in a while, Mom's emails would question the paternity of the baby, and I'd always assure her it was mine. Kelly wouldn't send me any pictures of her because she said she was fat. She wouldn't even see me if we had similar times off, which hurt. My mother questioned if she was seeing someone else, maybe the baby's true father. The last time she said it, I yelled, "Stop it, Mother. You don't know a goddamn thing about how much Kelly and I love each other." She jumped in fear. It was the first time I had ever yelled at my mother. I didn't come home when I had breaks after that, at least that year. I did get time off and drive to Kelly's school on her last day for the school year and wait for her at her last class. When she walked out, she looked radiant and more beautiful than ever. Then I saw this dude come up and put his arm in her arm and start a walk with her. I became instantly pissed and quick marched towards them. He noticed me first and dropped her arm and made an immediate about face when I yelled, "Hey dude, get your bum back here now. Don't make me chase you." Kelly turned to see me and got this big smile and ran to me, her little belly bump poking out from her sweater. She threw her arms around my neck and kissed me hard, but I kept looking for the guy who was holding Kelly's arm. Breaking our kiss, I held her at arm's length and firmly asked, "Okay, Kelly, just who was that guy that seemed to be way too familiar with you when you came out of class? Be honest, because I'm going to find out before I leave." She smiled and said, "Oh, that's just Josh. He's another nurse. He's harmless really, just a good friend. We talk and he walks me back to my dorm. I feel safer if he walks me than if I walk alone. Since when did you start staying on campus? I thought you were driving home every day?" I asked. She hooked her arm in mine and pulled me towards the dorms while saying, "Michael, with the baby, it was getting to be such a chore to drive every day, so Daddy sprang for a dorm room for me, so I didn't have to drive during the week, and he or Mom will come up on Friday and pick me up, then drop me off on Sunday night or Monday morning, depending on my class schedule. My counselor and instructors have been very considerate about my condition." Then she stopped in front of me and began to bounce up and down saying, "Guess what? Guess what?" She was so cute. I had to ask, "Okay, sweetness, I'll give. What's your secret?" With a smile as big as Texas, she said, "Next month, Dr. Gwen will do an ultrasound on me, and we will get to find out the sex of our baby. Tell me, what do you want? A boy or a girl?" I pulled her in and kissed her and said, "My love, as long as it's healthy, I really don't care. I will love him or her until my dying day." When we got to her room, her mother was there, and boy did I get a cold reception. I tried to give her a kiss on the cheek, but she turned away from me and went to help Kelly pack. I guess I knew where I stood. I went back to my car and headed back to the academy. My studies were going well, though my thoughts were really focused on Kelly and our child. Then Kelly sent me an email with a picture of the ultrasound with the caption, "Can you see it?" To be honest, all I saw was the outline of a baby with a bunch of squiggles and shadows. So I blew up and printed it out. I took it to the infirmary and asked the medic if he could interpret it for me, and he and I took it to the doc. Doc smiled and said, "See this?" It still looked just like a shadow to me, and I shrugged my shoulders and he said, "Is this your child?" I smiled and nodded. He stuck out his hand and he said, "Well then, congratulations. It looks like you have an airman about to join this world. Are you ready to be a father?" The next thing I knew, he and an orderly had me in a chair and were waving smelling salts under my nose. I felt so embarrassed and jolted out of the chair. "Sir, I'm sorry, sir. I've never done that before, sir." He smiled and said, "What found out you were going to be a father or fainted?" Shaking the cobwebs out of my head, I said, "Sir, finding out we were having a son and fainting, sir." Doc looked at my records and said, "Mr. Grant, your records don't show that you are married. Are you, or are you going to wait until the baby is born? If you are married, you should have reported that to the commandant and the records office." "Sir, I didn't realize I needed to report it to the records office, but the general was at our wedding. My wife Kelly is his niece." I told him. He lowered his glasses and gave me the look and said, "You married the general's niece. Was she pregnant when you got married?" I hung my head and nodded. Shaking his head, he said, "Son, you really like playing with dynamite, don't you? Hell, son, you might find yourself stationed in Antarctica, or most likely Eielson Air Force Base or Clear Air Force Station, both in Alaska, hidden away from everyone until your tour is up. You really screw the pooch." My gut told me he could be right. It was the 12th of October and I was on the firing range. It seems I had a natural affinity for hitting targets with my weapons, both pistol and rifle. The range instructor had kept moving me to positions where the targets were further and further away, and I kept putting them dead center, though at first it took me a shot or two to get my distance and windage right, but after that, I was dead on. I had just finished laying down a series of rounds at 1,000 meters when my cell phone went off with a picture of Kelly holding our new son. The caption was, "What should we name him?" I let out a yell that could be heard at the end of the obstacle course, which brought a few officers to see what was all the commotion was about. Showing them the picture on my phone brought a bunch of slaps on the back and congratulations, and the range instructor told me to head to my barracks as I had done well, and he needed to send in a report on me. I had been giving a lot of thought about a name for our son, and I called Kelly and was very surprised when she answered. After telling her how much I loved her and our new son, I said, "My love, what would you think if we named him James Hal Grant, after your uncle?" Kelly started to say something but stopped mid-sentence and said, "Michael, that's one of the reasons I love you so much. Do you have any idea how much my mother will love that name? Not to mention Uncle Hal. When do you think you can get home to see your son and me? I'm sorry I've been standoffish, but Mother thinks that maybe you didn't turn that girl down, or have been seeing another girl while you have been away." Boy, I was really hating my mother-in-law about now. I said, "Kelly, you were acting so funny that I thought you might be seeing someone else, and when I saw you walking arm in arm with that dude, it just about made me explode. I love you so much, and losing you would be the worst thing that could ever happen to me. I know your feelings about cheating, and would never do that to you because I value our relationship so much. Do you realize that?" I could hear Kelly sniffle, and I told her I never meant for her to cry, and I loved her, and would go see the general as soon as possible. I asked her to email me the picture she sent in a text of her holding James, so I could take it to the general. She said she would, and in less than a minute, I heard my computer ding that I had a new email. I opened my messages, and there was the picture I needed. I used a photo editing program and added words to the picture. October 12th, 1999, announcing the arrival of our future airman, James Hal Grant, born to Michael and Kelly Grant. I then printed out several copies and ran to the general's office. His aide stopped me and at first told me that the general was busy. I told him that his niece had just delivered a baby boy and showed him the picture. He got a big smile and said, "I'll tell him it's a special delivery. I hope he doesn't kick my bum. You know you pissed him off." don't you?" I nodded. He opened the door, hollered, "Special delivery," and I quick-timed up to his desk, saluted, and when he saw me, he jumped up and yelled, "Just what the Sam Hill do you think you are doing here?" I then handed him one of the pictures without saying a word. He started to throw it away without looking at it, but then something caught his attention. He took a long look at it, then fell back into his chair. His chin quivered and a tear slid down his cheek. Then he held the picture to his chest with his eyes closed for several minutes. When he opened his eyes, he said, "I suppose you are here to ask for some time off to go see your new son, aren't you?" Taking a deep breath, I said, "Sir, I can't expect anything from you. I know you don't approve of our actions, but we really do love each other and had planned on getting married when I graduate in June. When you called and told Kelly about me turning down that girl, she decided to, well, reward me by having sex with me. She had gotten on birth control pills, but her mother never told her that the women in your family had issues with them not working for them. Sir, I tried to stop when I felt I was going to explode, but Kelly wouldn't let me, and, well, now we have James, your namesake." "Sir." The general chuckled and said, "Sounds like the James women. Art told me something similar, as did my other brother-in-law, Chuck. When those women want it, they go after it. I guess I should have talked to you before I got in such a huff." He then picked up his phone and I heard him talking to someone. He said, "Jim, file a flight plan to Edwards ASAP, wheels up within an hour. I'm bringing a cadet with me." "Yes, I know. Just do it. I'll explain later. Thanks again." The general turned to me and said, "Michael, go pack quickly as our flight leaves within the hour. Meet me on the tarmac in 45 minutes. We've got a new baby to go see." I ran to my barracks and threw some clothes in my ditty bag and caught a ride to the runway. On the way, I realized that I didn't know which plane the general was taking. Once we got there was this glistening Cessna jet warming its engines as the fuel truck was pulling away. I walked over and saluted the pilot. He looked at me, then asked, "Are you the general's guest?" "Sir, yes, sir," I answered. He shook his head and asked, "So what's so special about you that the general is breaking protocol to take you to Edwards AFB on such short notice? Did you catch him screwing one of his aides or something?" "Sir, what are you talking about?" I asked. "Well, son, it's just that the general has been single as far back as anyone can tell, and he never has shown any interest in women that anyone has ever seen, so the rumor is that he might be gay," he said. "Hardly," I said. "The general has several ladies he keeps on the down low. He just never wants to get involved in a long-term relationship with a woman. When he was in Iraq, his beautiful wife was screwing one of his fellow officers on the base, and almost everyone knew it, even the commanding officer, but no one said anything to him. The guy knocked her up just before the general got wounded, and then was sent to Germany to be patched up. The witch was notified that he would be flying home within a week, and she and the officer took off for the hills, taking the general's 2 young daughters with them. He was never able to find them. That officer went AWOL, and the general is still hoping that he slips up one day and gets caught so he can find out where his daughters are." Just then I spotted the big Chrysler with the 2 star flags flying on the fenders heading this way. I told the captain, "Better get in the cockpit. Here he comes now, and it looks like he's ready to go." I followed him up the steps and stored my bag, and Cover then took a seat across from what I assumed was the general's seat, as it was larger and had several computers around it. The general flew in and saw me sitting there and smiled. Then surprisingly, he headed into the cockpit. 2 of his aides came in with luggage and quickly stored them and found seats and buckled in, followed by the 2 guards. One guard went to the back of the plane while the other closed the steps. He took a seat near the entrance and hollered, "All secured and seated, sir." I heard the engines picking up their whine as we began to roll forward, faster and faster, and when we turned onto the approach, I thought we might turn over. We were going so fast, but as soon as we were straight with the runway, it was full power and we shot into the sky. The night sky over Denver was something to behold. I was so focused on trying to locate the places I had visited that I didn't realize that I was being called until one of the aides shook my shoulder. "Hey, Grant," he said, "didn't you hear the general over the intercom? He wants you up in the cockpit." I couldn't for the life of me figure out what he wanted me up there for, but I unbuckled and quickly went. As I entered, I had to squeeze past the captain, and he smiled at me. The general was in the left seat, flying the plane, and he motioned me to sit in the co-pilot seat. I sat down and buckled in. General James then said, "Go ahead, cadet, take over, son." Now I had never flown an airplane or even been in a cockpit before. I grabbed the wheel and put my feet on the pedals like the general had had his. I was trying to hold the plane as steady as I could, but the general said, "Come on, Michael. It's time you showed me what you got." And with that, he grabbed my left hand and yanked it down almost to my knee as he pushed it forward. The airplane's nose dove towards the earth, making a sharp turn to the left. I pulled the steering wheel, I was later corrected to call it the stick, back and to the right, and got the plane at least heading level again. The general said, "Son, did you happen to notice what altitude we were flying at before we had that little interruption? That could have been a wind shear, you know." "Sir, no, sir," I answered. I looked at all the gauges, then asked, "Sir, which one shows me how high we are?" The general laughed and pointed it out. He then took his time to point out all of the gauges and told me what each one was for. He also showed me how the controls worked and gave me some flight instructions. He had me play with the controls and get familiar with them. All too soon, I heard the general talking to the Edwards Tower and getting landing permission and instructions. The general showed me how to set the flaps and to figure in the crosswind. You know, this was pretty cool. As soon as we hit the ground and were parked, the general and I were ushered into a waiting Cadillac limo, and we rushed to the hospital where Kelly was. This security guard stood as we entered, and the general barked, "Sit down, son. We know where we're going." He backed away looking at the two armed guards behind us, and we headed to the elevator and up to the 7th floor, where he led me to room 714, which was filled with flowers and balloons. When I walked in, Kelly was feeding our son and her eyes lit up like lighthouse beacons. She started crying and said, "Michael, I can't believe you're here." I rushed to her and we kissed. Then she said, "Careful, you don't want to crush your son, do you?" She pulled him from her breast, handing him to me, and I saw his cute little face, and he looked so much like my baby pictures. I knew my mother couldn't deny that I was his father now. General James was on Kelly's other side and gently brushing her face with his hand and whispered something into her ear. She pulled him down and kissed him on the cheek, which he returned. I felt like I was walking on air. I walked around the bed and asked, "General, sir, would you like to hold James?" He looked down at the tiny infant and took him in his large hands so carefully. It was like he was afraid he was going to break him. Kelly smiled at him and said, "Uncle Hal, you can hold him. Don't be afraid. You're not going to hurt him." After carefully taking him from me, the general moved over to the chair by the window and sat down and opened the blanket and our son's diaper. Then looking over at us, he said with pride, "Yep, I sure can see he's a James, all right." I guess he was referring to his male equipment. I walked over to take a look and thought he took after me but kept quiet. The general refastened the diaper, and I went back to Kelly and we kissed as I held her. It wasn't but a few minutes later when both of our mothers walked into the room, and as Sarah, Kelly's mother, tried to take little James from the general, he admonished her and said, "Sorry, sis, you will have lots of time with this little bundle of joy. We're going to have to head back in the morning." Kelly sat upright and she almost cried, "Uncle Hal, can't you two at least stay a few days? Please, pretty please." As he rocked little James, he said, "Kelly, I really wish I could, but I have an afternoon appointment with Senator Perkins tomorrow, and he is another one that is on the Appropriations Committee. He said it was very important we meet. My intel says he's trying to get his son into the academy, but the lad has been kicked out of 4 colleges already for his poor grades and alcohol and drug use. I don't know what he expects out of us. We're not a rehab facility. I guess we could put him in the brig for his first semester, just to get his attention and clean him up." Everyone laughed at that. Kelly asked, "Could Michael stay? Maybe until Sunday?" The general pursed his lips in thought. The room was silent for what seemed an eternity. Then he said, "You know, I really could use some more time in the pilot's seat. Michael, report to Edwards on Sunday, 0900 sharp." "That's an order." I rushed over and hugged him, which caught him off guard. Though flustered at first, he eventually put his arm around me, returning the hug. The next 3 days seemed to fly by, getting Kelly and James out of the hospital and moved into her old bedroom at her parents' home. They had set up a lovely nursery for him, decorated for a little boy, and my mom and dad were there as much as possible. Mom almost always brought food along, so my mother-in-law didn't seem to mind. Everything was wonderful, but it wasn't until Saturday afternoon that it changed. I went up to James' room to check on him when I caught my mother using Q-tips to swab his mouth that I became incensed with her. I went to grab the baggie she put them in, but she stuck them in the pocket of her skirt before I could. I was about to yell when she put her fingers to her lips and mouth. "Michael, I have to know." I turned and stormed out of his room. Kelly could see that I was upset and asked what was wrong. "Nothing." I snapped back at her. She came up and held me and looked into my eyes, questioning me, so I said, "Sorry, honey. It's just that I'm going to hate to leave you and our son. I don't know when I'm going to be able to see you again." Damn, I hated lying to her. She pulled me in for a smoking hot kiss, which was broke by her father coughing behind us. The flight back was a lot more fun. I was getting better as the general was explaining more of the controls to me, and I was getting the hang of flying. As we neared the academy, he asked, "So now do you think you might like to become a pilot?" I thought for a second, then said, "Sir, yes sir. Just a regular pilot, not a fighter pilot though. I really could see me being your chauffeur." He belly laughed at that. The general took over the landing, but I was watching closely as he followed the tower's instructions and set the flaps, then engine speed and flared out and set us down gently onto the runway. Soon I was enrolled in flight school and my senior year passed in a flash. I did manage to get home for Thanksgiving and Christmas and was amazed at how big James had gotten each time I was there. I was able to take off for Kelly's graduation, and she and James came up with my parents for mine. My mother was smiling like a Cheshire cat, and I asked her what was up. She whispered to me, "Just so you know, son, James is yours." I am so relieved. I told her, "Don't you ever tell Kelly what you did, or so help me, mother. You will never see James again." She gave me a look of terror, and I said, "Mother, I mean it. You really overstepped your bounds this time." We went out for dinner to celebrate, though it wasn't as joyous as it could have been. I was also continuing my flight school and sniper training, plus more engineering schooling, which kept me busy nearly 12 hours a day. I missed Thanksgiving, but by Christmas, I had gotten my multiple engine flight license and was close to getting my jet certification. I had finished my sniper training and my engineering degree, so I was expecting to be deployed to a base soon. Then they sent me on a couple of overseas missions, which I'm not supposed to talk about, but I was the sharpshooter for intel groups. It was cool once while in a South American country, as a group of soldiers came marching up this mountain road towards our position, led by an officer sitting up high in the back of a jeep, that I shot off his left epaulette to get his attention. He immediately turned the group around and went back down the mountain. I also went to the Middle East a couple of times and took out designated targets, but I was never able to tell Kelly about it, as these were all classified missions. Imagine my surprise when I received an email telling me that I had 6 weeks leave coming from the middle of December to the 1st of February, and then was to report to Edwards as my new duty station. I was also eligible for base housing if I wanted for Kelly, James, and me. I called her as soon as I read the email and told her the good news. Kelly was still taking classes to become a surgical nurse, but at a local college, so that wasn't going to be a problem. I called and made reservations for 3 days at the Hilton for the honeymoon suite for us, starting the day I got back as a surprise for Kelly. She was surprised and very enthusiastic and arranged for her mother to watch James, who by now was walking and getting into everything. Let me say that we tore up those sheets like crazy. Several times, Kelly went to the door to let room service in just holding a towel or sheet around her gorgeous form, much to the bellboy's delight, and usually, they would forego their tip. She would usually have it tucked into the cloth hanging out above her jugs. Sometimes, a lot of her thigh was on display. She was such a tease for those young men. Once we had a young woman delivering our breakfast, and she didn't seem like she wanted to leave. She pushed the cart in and made sure to serve up our plates while never breaking eye contact with Kelly. When she finally asked if we wanted or needed anything else and I said no, that's all, and gave her a $20 bill. She left, but before we got a bite to eat, Kelly threw me back on the bed and used her mouth to get me hard, then mounted me, orgasming very hard. Kelly had an IUD put in, so we didn't have to worry about pregnancy, or so we thought. Not quite 2 years later, during a very vigorous lovemaking session, I guess we knocked the damn thing loose, or maybe it just didn't work. 9 months later, Alicia was born. Kelly had a very rough delivery this time, and without asking me, told her doctor to tie her tubes. I didn't find out until almost a year later when she was talking with her friend at a party, pretty blitzed, and didn't realize I was standing behind her. That was one of our big arguments, but there was nothing I could do about it. It was a trust issue with me. Alicia was the general's first daughter's name. He showed up at her christening and was crying as he held her. She was so beautiful in her little white dress. After the ceremony, we went out to lunch and the general paid the bill, then quickly walked outside. I went out and saw him around the corner crying again. "What's the matter, sir? Is there something I can do? We never intended for this to hurt you. I hope you know that," I told him. He was trying to wipe his eyes and stop the tears, but they kept flowing. He shook his head and managed to say, "I'm sorry, I shouldn't be letting my feelings show. It's just that by now, Alicia and Sarah Marie, I'm sure, have little ones of their own. I have grandchildren that I've never met and probably never will. It hurts." Blowing his nose on a tissue, he threw it into a trash container, then turned and walked away before I could say anything. I had a thought and carefully picked up the tissue. I went inside the restaurant and asked if they had a baggie, and the waitress said no, but she did produce some plastic wrap, so I bundled up the tissue, which brought questions from the others. I didn't tell them anything. At home, I took the tissue and put 2 samples on Q-tips and sent them off to Ancestry.com on a hunch with my name and email as a contact. Imagine my surprise when 2 months later, I received an email from Emily Grayland and Jane Burke, sisters who had found out that they had DNA related to James. I asked their ages and about their background. They said grown up in Canada and were told that their records were lost. Their father was John Bronson and their mother was Carolyn. They also had a younger brother, Kenneth. Their family had moved to Alaska not too long after Kenny had been born because he needed medical attention that wasn't available in the logging town where they lived. It took John and their mother several years to get all their records straightened out, but eventually they had. They had eventually settled in Southern Oregon, near Roseburg, and the girls had married. John had died of cancer a few years back, and their mother was in a nursing home in Roseburg and not doing very well. Emily had 3 daughters and Jane had 3 sons and a daughter. I emailed them for their phone numbers and said we needed to talk. They sent them to me and we got on a conference call. When I explained that their mother had been married to General Harold P. James and that their mother had run away with her lover when he had gotten her pregnant, taking the girls with them when she found out he had been injured and was coming home, the 2 lovers ran away and took them away with them. Both of the women said that they had memories of another father, but their mother had told them that they were wrong and to forget it. I asked who was older, and Emily said it was her, and I said, "Your name was Alicia." She gasps and said, "That's my eldest daughter's name." Then I told Jane, "Your name was Sarah Marie. Do you recognize that?" She started crying, then told me it was her middle daughter's name, and her oldest son was named James. "Well, girls, it seems you have a decision to make. Do you want me to tell your real father that I have found you, or would you rather do it yourself? I'm married to his niece, and we have a son and daughter. My stupid mother doubted that I was his father and sent in to check his DNA against mine. Apparently, the girls were together as I could hear them whispering. Then they came back and asked, 'Do you know how we could get to meet him in person?' I said, 'Ladies, I will see what I can do. Let me call you back once I have arranged things, okay?' They both agreed, though I could tell they were both crying. I called General James and said, 'General, I have a big favor to ask without you asking me too many questions.' He asked me what I needed. I said, 'I need you to fly me to Roseburg, Oregon as soon as possible.' No questions asked. 'Does this involve Kelly?' he asked. Indirectly, I answered, 'It really affects you and your whole family, mine too.' 'Harumph boy, why are you being so secretive?' he asked. 'You'll see,' I said. He told me he couldn't make it until Saturday, and I said that would be fine. I called the ladies, and we made arrangements for them to be at the airport. I told them I would give them a time as soon as I knew what it would be. Saturday morning, as we walked into the Roseburg airport, these 2 blonde lovelies ran up to the general and began kissing him from both sides. At first, he was trying to fend them off, then turned to me and asked, 'Lieutenant Grant, what's the meaning of this?' I smiled and said, 'Sir, don't you recognize Alicia and Sarah Marie?' His eyes went wide and both of them said in unison, 'Daddy, we've missed you so much,' then began hugging and kissing him like crazy. For the 3rd time, I watched as a steady stream of tears flowed down his cheeks. This time they were tears of joy. Then Alicia turned and waved as their husbands herded their kids out from the wings and introductions followed. I moved out of the way as the general needed to sit down to absorb all the attention he was getting. He had found his long-lost daughters and found that he had 7 grandchildren he never knew about. I had to call Kelly and let her know we would be spending a few days there. We didn't leave until Wednesday afternoon, and I thought the general's chest was going to explode. He was so proud. As we were about to leave, he said, "Michael, I really owe you big time. You can't imagine how this feels to me. I will forever be indebted to you. Now let's get you back." My next duty station with Kelly and the kids was Hawaii. Man, what a place to be stationed. After I finished my tour, I went to work at a local firm designing power switching equipment, and Kelly got a job with a good surgeon, Dr. Penrose, who specializes in orthopedic surgery. I really like him. He was in his late 40s and his wife was a real knockout. She was also his receptionist and kept pretty good tabs on him. Kelly worked for him for 15 years until he retired and sold his business to Dr. Shah. She is East Indian but very pleasant to be around and a first-class surgeon. She always wears puffy blouses and long skirts, hiding what I am sure is a very sexy body underneath. Always wanting to improve her surgical techniques, Dr. Shah went to a lot of training seminars and most often took Kelly with her. I was a good house husband, and the kids were at the age where they were capable of taking care of themselves. They were teenagers after all. Soon, James was in college and Alicia was in high school, and I had become the senior partner in the company and making a very nice income. Both of the kids had fairly nice cars, and we had a lovely house with a pool and jacuzzi out back. Then Kelly went with Dr. Shah to Dallas for a 2-week training on how to operate a robotic surgical device. She had been so excited about it because it was going to be the first one in our area, and she kept telling me about how much better it was going to be for the patients and also for the doctors. It was a long 2 weeks without her. Plus, Alicia was busy with school and her friends, so I was usually the only one home until Alicia got home, and often she was staying with her girlfriends. After over 22 years together, Kelly was still as sexy as ever. She was definitely what I'd call a MILF, and most of my friends had commented on how lucky I was. I had kept up a 4-day-a-week regimen at the gym and could still wear the same size clothes as I had when I got out of the Air Force. I also ran to and from work, weather permitting. Even with all that work, our sex life had sure seemed to dwindle over the past few years. Not my desire, but Kelly's. It seemed she was either too tired, or busy, or this hurt or something. She had asked me to please wait until she was in the mood because my constant asking was getting on her nerves, so I hadn't asked her in nearly 2 months, though she still hadn't initiated anything with me. It had been over 6 months since we had actually had sex. The afternoon I picked her up from the airport, Kelly was all over me on the ride home. She was stroking me outside my slacks, kissing my neck, rubbing my chest, and whispering what she was going to do to me once we got home. As soon as the garage door closed, she grabbed my hand and shoved it between her legs. Damned console. We had a smoldering kiss and she said, "Quick, I need you to screw me now." She jumped out of the car as did I, only instead of heading inside, she pulled up her dress and laid down on the hood of the car, wiggling her finger at me. I was stone hard and more than ready. This was a Kelly I really didn't recognize. Kelly was coming yet again when the other garage door began to open and we jumped up and ran into the kitchen and upstairs to our bedroom, giggling like a couple of caught teenagers. A few minutes later, Alicia came to our door and knocked. "Mom, are you in there? Can I come in, please?" Kelly said, "Honey, I need to clean up after my trip. I'll meet you in the kitchen. Pour me a big Sprite, would you please?" "Sure, Mom," she said, and we both giggled as she left. Kelly dropped her dress, and she was naked underneath. I couldn't believe it, and she pushed me back onto the bed, unzipped my pants, pulled them down, and quickly mounted me. It only took a few minutes, and she began to orgasm. She hopped off and said, "Thanks, hun. I really needed that. I sure hope there's more tonight. Got to see what Alicia wants." With that, she went into the bathroom, then threw on some Daisy Dukes and a wife-beater t-shirt and headed downstairs to the kitchen. I got cleaned up and put on shorts and a t-shirt and headed downstairs. As I rounded the corner into the kitchen, Kelly saw me and shook her head no, letting me know this was a private conversation between the two of them, so I headed into my den and fired up my computer. First, I went to our bank account and found there were a couple of charges in Dallas, one for a dress and one for a pedi and bikini wax. Then I typed in Dallas Robotics Seminar, and up popped their website of this year's event. The first several pictures were of the organizers, then the vendors and their wares, then the presenters and their bios, then a list of the attendees. Imagine my surprise to see my wife's picture. Kelly's picture showed her in a gorgeous little black dress, showing lots of cleavage with a pearl necklace and matching earrings that I had never seen before. She was wearing what appeared to be 4 or 5-inch CFM shiny red heels that matched her fingernails and lipstick. She was absolutely glowing. I printed out a picture of her and then laminated it and took it to our bedroom and hid it under my side of the mattress. My stomach was now churning. Was her horniness due to her trying to satisfy her guilt at having an affair at the seminar? How do I approach her with this? I called Kelly's favorite Oriental place and ordered takeout to be delivered at 5:30. Alicia had a date and wasn't going to eat. That meant leftovers for her. Kelly was looking so sexy as she ate. She was eating so sexily I was having trouble reminding myself of her picture at the seminar until she got some sauce on her fingers from the sweet and sour shrimp and stuck them deep in her mouth and sucked them while slowly pulling them out with her tongue on the underside as she watched my face for my reaction. I picked her up and managed to carry her up the stairs to our bedroom, and I tossed her on the bed and quickly rid myself of my attire. Kelly had positioned herself on her hands and knees and said, "Come on, big boy. Show me how you can ride your witch," as she wiggled her bum in readiness. My wife never talked like this before going to this seminar. I did keep pounding away for her sake, and she was exploding like a broken slot machine. I think it was the anger that was making me do it. I don't know. Finally, Kelly said, "Michael, please stop. I'm getting sore." So I pulled out and went into the bathroom to pee. I washed off, then got into bed while Kelly used the restroom. She crawled under the covers and cuddled up tightly. We lay there in silence, then I moved my arm, so it was under Kelly's head and she snuggled in tighter. I noticed a tear coming down her cheek and I asked, "Care to tell me about it, sweetheart? Something happened at the seminar, didn't it?" Kelly let out a big sigh, then turned onto her back, looking up at the ceiling and thought. Finally, she let out a big sigh and said, "You know, Michael, at the academy, you had all those gorgeous female cadets running around you could have had your pick of. Did you ever have sex with any of them or think of having sex with any of them?" "Kelly, my love, the only woman that I wanted while I was there was you. Even when that nearly nude young cadet grabbed me and tried to pull me into that apartment, I knew I couldn't cheat on you. I knew if I did, I would lose you if it ever got back to you." She was quiet for a moment, then said, "What about the times you were on a mission and there were females along or females available for some easy sex? Did you ever think about playing with one of them?" Now that one was harder, as I had been sent as cover on a special ops mission down to South America, and there were 5 female officers and me. Captain Tyler and I ended up in the same pup tent, and she slept in the nude and on top of her sleeping bag. I was trying to be a gentleman and kept turned away from her. In the middle of the night, she snuggled up tight to me and slid her hands under the sheet and into my boxers and began playing and teasing me. Captain Tyler could have easily been a playboy or hustler centerfold. It took everything I had to pull her hand out from under the sheet and calmly say to her, "Captain, if I weren't married to the love of my life, I'd be screwing you until sunrise every night we were on this detail, probably longer. I love Kelly, and I will never do anything to risk our marriage. She is the love of my life, and our baby boy is a piece of heaven. Please understand." She moved somewhat on top of me and kissed me deeply and said, "Hell, why are all the good ones like you already married?" as she rolled over and pulled the sheet over herself. So I told Kelly the truth, almost, and said, "Yes, dear. I had an officer come on to me once and made it very clear she wanted to have sex with me, but I told her that you were my life and that James was my piece of heaven and I would never risk losing you too." Kelly rolled her eyes at this, then said, "Okay then, what about all the times you had to take those road trips to check out equipment or do equipment installs? I mean, you were sometimes gone for a week or 2 at a time. Didn't you get horny while you were gone? Were there women there that gave you relief, or you wish they would have?" Shaking my head, I said, "To be honest, no woman I met could hold a candle to my beautiful, sexy wife. If I needed relief, I would open my phone and look at those sexy pictures of you we took at that little B&B in the woods that spring. Remember that weekend? Then I'd use those pictures to please myself. I hope you don't get upset with me. I would stop at least a week before I came home so I wouldn't deprive you of any pleasure. What's up with all the questions? Are you going to tell me what happened at the seminar?" Squeezing my hand, Kelly said, "Promise not to get mad?" I leaned up on my elbow and said, "My dear, that all depends on what you have to tell me. Right now I'm on pins and needles and can't honestly say. Please tell me what's going on. She took a deep breath and said, since you've never fantasized, this might be difficult for you. For the last couple of years, I have been having this fantasy of a lover taking me, not away from you, just for some fun, some wild sex. Michael, I love you, but we've gone stale and I'm desiring something else. My body is in turmoil and I find myself having fantasies about men I see. I mean in the grocery store, in the hospital, doctors, male nurses, that substitute mailman we had. I mean any good-looking tall gentleman. I just don't want to hurt you. I told myself that it was just a fantasy and would try to be sexier for you, but it never seemed to turn out right. Something always came up. The kids, you had to work late. I was called in for emergency surgery. It was always something. I wiped away a couple of tears on her cheeks. Honey, what would you say if I told you that I was feeling the same way? Only I wasn't fantasizing about anyone else. It was just reliving the wild times that you and I had and was wishing we could be doing that again. So what happened while you were in Dallas? I said. Sniffling, she said, I met someone. You what? I yelled as I sat up in bed. Kelly tried to calm me and said, no, honey, it's not like that. Well, not completely. We didn't have sex. Not really. Let me tell you the whole story, but you need to calm down and be quiet. Can you do that? Kelly took a couple of deep breaths, then holding on tightly to my hand said, the first day or two, we were immersed in different seminars. Then the third day, one of the presenters, Dr. David Patterson, walked onto the platform and I felt my panties get wet. My palms became sweaty and I was having trouble listening to what he had to say. I was so enamored with this tall, handsome black doctor it wasn't funny. Don't say it. Yes, he is black, but he is very much a gentleman and I think you will like him. Did she tell me that I will like him? She continued, that night we had a cocktail party and I got dressed up in a new red dress I had purchased. Yes, I bought it for him. It showed a lot of cleavage and was cut mid-thigh. It took me a while, but I finally found David and seeing he was drinking wine. I grabbed 2 glasses from the steward and walked over to him, handing him one. He was surprised at my actions and told the others to excuse him, and we began to talk. It was small talk and I found out that he was recently divorced. His wife had left him for another man. They hadn't had any children. Her idea, not his. I talked about you and the kids and said that I worked at County General in LA with Dr. Shah. He blinked and said, County General, really? I'm going to be starting there soon as the head of their new robotic team.